Hello everyone, welcome to the GTAC Tech Talk webinar on PTZ Camera Configuration and Support Tips in Security Center. Thank you for being here today. My name is Derek. I'm a Technical Training e-Content Specialist with Genetec, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. We also have Nancy joining us from the Genetec Technical Assistance Center today, who will be helping with the questions and answers during the webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can type them in the question box at the GoToWebinar console, and one of us will get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. In case we need to verify any information for your question, we'll make a note of it and send you an email as soon as we have an answer for you. All the questions and answers from the webinar will be posted on the GTAC Tech Talk section of the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal forums about a day or two after the webinar has finished. If you have any additional questions or comments on the webinar or the GTAC Tech Talk webinar series in general, you can post them in this section of the GTAC forum as well. This webinar is being recorded, and all the webinar videos can be found on the GTAC by going to the Resources section, and then going to Videos, and going to the GTAC Tech Talk section on the left. Now there are two ways that you can watch these on the GTAC, either streaming in a browser window by clicking on this icon right here, or you can download a zipped Windows media file by clicking on the second icon right here. One other way you can watch these videos and other GTAC Tech Talk videos, how-to videos, and operator training videos is on the new Genetec training channel on YouTube. All the previous videos from the GTAC have been uploaded to the channel, which can be accessed from your desktop PC or from a mobile device as well. Please check it out. Just search for Genetec Training on YouTube. If you'd like to receive emails concerning the latest additions to the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal, you can log into the GTAC, go into the My Account section, and click on Email and Notifications. From the Notifications section, you can check the boxes of the subjects you're interested in and select how often you'd like to receive an email when there have been additions to those sections. To put a checkbox next to a subject, the frequency will have to be set to daily or weekly, otherwise the options below it will be grayed out. If you make any changes, don't forget to hit the Submit button on the bottom to save your preferences. Now before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about the goals of this webinar and basically what I hope you'll get out of it. Now when we were reviewing the topics that generated cases in the support department, problems with PTZ or pan-tilt zoom cameras were up there as one of the top categories. Some of these issues were about configuration details, and others were problems encountered while using the PTZ cameras. With that in mind, we took a look at what kind of problems were encountered and gathered some information on the most common things that fix them. Hopefully this will serve as a good reference if you run into any of these problems in the field, or at least somewhere to start when troubleshooting. Now looking at the agenda for the webinar, we're going to start with a general look at how to add a PTZ or pan-tilt zoom camera, both for IP and analog cameras. We'll take a look at the settings involved just to get everyone on the same page, including how to set up automatic commands. After that, we have a number of troubleshooting scenarios that we'll take a look at and how to fix them. And the last section is a few general tips that you can try when all else fails. We're going to see a few of these in the previous section, but usually when it's a proven solution for a specific problem. Now one thing we've been doing in the GTAC Tech Talk webinars lately is putting a table of contents on the side here. Now the agenda is pretty straightforward this time, so I bumped it up to the top here, but if you need to go back and review the video, you can just keep an eye on the marker and you can see which section we're actually in. Okay, so let's start out by taking a look at how to add a PTZ camera when using an IP camera or an IP encoder connected to an analog camera. The difference between the two is that an IP camera is an all-in-one unit, where the PTZ motor is connected to the camera and everything is added as one unit. When we're adding an analog PTZ camera that's connected to an encoder, we're actually adding the encoder, and the encoder takes care of the communication with the camera and the PTZ motor. This requires a little more configuration, as we have to set up the serial port that's going to be used to control the PTZ motor. To add an IP PTZ camera, just go through the normal procedure of adding a video unit to Security Center. Once the unit has been added, you will see a dome for the camera icon. Taking a look at the hardware tab for the camera, you will see that the PTZ slider is on and grayed out, and it should already have selected the appropriate protocol to use. The protocol configured in this section of Security Center must match the one used by the PTZ unit, or they will not be able to communicate. Once the unit has been added, you can double-click on the camera icon to bring up the live video and test out the PTZ controls. That's really all you need to do for IP PTZ cameras, so let's take a look at the analog version now. Now, there are two main connectors that you'll have to worry about with an analog PTZ: the video connection and the PTZ motor connection. Now, the video cable must go to the video input of an IP video encoder. The PTZ motor is connected to the serial port of an encoder as well, but this doesn't have to be the same encoder. If you're using separate IP encoder units for video and PTZ control for one camera, just make sure that they're both added to the same archiver in the system. Multiple PTZ cameras can use the same serial port on the encoder for control, but we're going to see how that's done in just a minute. Now, the first thing to do when you're adding the analog camera is to add the IP video encoder to Security Center. If it has a video input, it will show up as a fixed camera entity in the logical view. Now, remember that the IP encoder must be on the supported device list, but any analog camera can be used with it, since Security Center is really only talking to the video unit itself. Next, we need to set up the serial port that we're going to be using to control the PTZ. The settings configured in Security Center will need to match the ones on the IP video encoder. You can usually log into the web page of the video unit, like the access one we have here, and you can see what the port settings are. Now, we're going to need to configure the data bits, the parity, the stop bits, the baud rate, and the mode as well. Now, some cameras can provide feedback on the PTZ position, but this is going to require a 4-wire connection to the serial port. 2-wire connections only provide commands to the PTZ, but they don't get any information back from it. This is set in the serial port mode, as well as the type of standard used, RS422 or RS485. Now, please note that some units may not support all of these standards. Now, next, from the Security Center config tool, we need to click on the video unit and go to the Peripherals tab. If the unit was added correctly, you should see a serial port listed on this page. Edit the serial port by clicking on it and clicking on the pencil icon on the bottom, or just double-click on the serial port. This is where we can name the port and configure all the port settings with the same values as the physical unit that we just took a look at. Our next step is to enable the PTZ controls on the camera we're using. In this example that we're doing right now, we're going to be using the same IP video encoder for the serial port as for the video port. So to enable the PTZ controls, click on the camera icon in the logical view, and then go to the Hardware tab. Slide the PTZ setting to On, and we're going to see a few more controls show up underneath here. The first setting here is the protocol that's being used by the PTZ motor. Some PTZ units have dip switches or toggle switches that allow you to select a protocol. Check your hardware manual to confirm that the protocol that's being used by the unit, and we need to select the same one in the config tool. The next step is to select the serial port that's connected to the PTZ motor. Now, as I mentioned, this doesn't have to be the same IP video unit as the video connection, but the unit it is connected to must be added to Security Center so it can be selected from the drop-down menu here. Now, one last important step here is the PTZ address. This is also usually defined on the PTZ motor or camera using a set of dip switches. If the address set in the config tool does not match the address on the unit, they will not be able to communicate properly. Using the PTZ address, we can set up multiple PTZ motors or cameras to use the same serial port. As long as the address is set differently, we can tell the PTZ commands to go to a different unit on the same serial port. For some units, address 0 is a broadcast address, and if you're going to be doing multiple addressing like this, you shouldn't be using the port 0. Okay, so with those 4 sections configured, you should now have control of the PTZ motor for the camera. So just like we did with the IP camera, we should have a dome for the camera icon here. So we can just double click on the entity to bring up the live video, and we can test it out using the PTZ controls from there. So that's the basic setup of what we need to do to get the PTZ moving, but what else can we do with it? Now, some units support enhanced PTZ controls. We can set those up from the Hardware tab, where the Enhanced PTZ option will be present if the controls are supported by the unit. With the Enhanced PTZ controls active, the basic PTZ control changes. So instead of having an arrow point around the window to where you'd like to move the PTZ unit, you must click on the center of the image and drag in the direction you want to move the PTZ. The length of the arrow here will basically determine how fast the PTZ will move. You also get additional controls like being able to click anywhere in the image to center the PTZ view on that point. You can also click and drag a box in the view, and the PTZ will center on that box and zoom in until the box fills the tile. Now, next to the protocol, we have a configuration button to change how the PTZ interacts with users on the system. From the pop-up window, the first thing we can set is the idle delay. This is how long the camera must not be moved by a user before it is considered to be stopped. Now, when a PTZ camera is in an idle state and a user moves the camera, a PTZ activated event is generated. As long as the PTZ is being moved by a user and the idle delay has not passed, the PTZ will stay in the active state, but will not generate any more separate PTZ activated events for different users. When this delay has passed, the PTZ stopped event is generated, and the PTZ will return to the idle state. The PTZ will remain locked for the last user who moved it for the entire idle time. Now, the same value applies for zooming in and out, but the events generated are PTZ zoom by user and PTZ zoom by user stopped. We can also tell the PTZ to perform a command after the PTZ returns to the idle state. From the idle command drop-down menu, we can choose to go to a preset, we can start running a pattern, or this is also sometimes called a tour depending on the camera manufacturer, or we can just choose to do nothing at all. That's the default setting, is no command. Now, we also have a lock delay value here. In the PTZ widget, there's a button to lock the PTZ for use by the current user. The PTZ will stay locked for the lock delay value no matter what the idle time is set to. Now, in case this is too long and the user wants to release control before this timeout expires, the lock button changes to a manual unlock button in the PTZ widget. This is what we have showing now is the unlock button here. Now this can be used also when the PTZ is locked by movement as well. So in that previous example, when we moved the PTZ, we would have had to unlock the controls for the other user to move the camera during the idle time. The idle delay, sorry. Okay, so speaking of the events generated, we can also perform other actions based on these events by setting up actions in the general settings of the system task. For example, if you have a PTZ camera that should keep running a pattern all weekend without interruption, you may want to know if a guard takes control of the PTZ to investigate something. In that case, we can create an action for that PTZ camera entity, and on the PTZ activated event, we can send an email to a specific person or email account to notify them of the movement. So for our example, we want the schedule created to be for the weekend, so this doesn't happen during the normal monitoring time. Alright, let's move on to our troubleshooting section, where we can take a look at the solutions to any issues you might run into. Now the first issue I want to examine is where the PTZ is not moving using any of the controls, like the widget, the in-tile controls, or using a CCTV keyboard. Now before we start taking a look through Security Center, we should first consider the physical setup and testing it from the source. If the unit has a web interface and the PTZ can be controlled from there, try to log in and move the PTZ around. If we can't move it, there's likely something that's not set up correctly on the unit itself, or in the case of an analog PTZ, there may be a wiring issue between the motor and the serial port. Now some manufacturers have specific settings that need to be changed as well. For example, to be able to use an Axis PTZ from the interface, we commonly need to set the COM port to pan tilt zoom. For use with Security Center, this setting should be the generic TCP/IP, which is underneath it, so don't forget to change it back to this after testing the unit. From here, we can start taking a look at some of the settings in the config tool. One of our most common culprits is the protocol used in the Hardware tab. Make sure that the one selected is usable by the unit and has been selected if there are dip switches to configure the protocol on the hardware itself. Also from the same place, make sure we have the correct PTZ address selected. The commands may be getting through to the unit, but if the address is not correct, they will be ignored. The address is also something that's usually configured using dip switches on the analog hardware. If you're connecting multiple units to one serial port, make sure they all have a unique address. Now, while troubleshooting one PTZ motor connected to a shared serial port, it would also be a good idea to connect only that unit to the serial port while we're testing it out. Now, the last thing to check from the Hardware tab is for an analog PTZ unit, and that's the serial port right here. And we need to make sure it is the correct port and not the port on a different unit, which does happen sometimes. I mean, we've all done it at least once. We also need to verify the port settings for the serial port to make sure they match with the unit configuration. Like we saw before, you can log into the unit and confirm the port settings from there, and then go back to the config tool and go to the peripherals page of the video unit the serial port is on. Double click on the serial port and make sure that all the settings that we have in here match the ones that we recorded and have set on the unit itself here. If the wiring looks okay and the settings are fine, it might be a good idea to run a trace with Wireshark or some other packet sniffer to see if the commands are actually getting through to the unit. Check with the manufacturer or in the manual for the unit to find out which port is being used for PTZ commands, and look for packets sent over that port to make sure they're reaching the destination. For example, for Axis units, we can take a look on port 1081 to see if the command packets are getting through to the encoder. If they aren't, we need to take a look at any firewalls in the system to see if the port is getting blocked somewhere along the line here. One last thing to test is if another user can control the PTZ, particularly an administrator user, if you have access to one. In this case, the user may not have the privileges to use the PTZ controls, the one that's not working. So just take a look at the Privileges tab for that user, and take a look under Action Privileges, Camera, View Live Video, and PTZ Motor Privileges. Now take a look in the Inherited From column as well. So if this user is denied the privilege in a user group they belong to, it will override any allowed privilege that may be set for the user individually. Alright, the next issue we're going to take a look at is if your PTZ controls are grayed out in the widget. There are a few things that might cause this, but the first I want to point out is this kind of behavior is actually normal if the camera is part of a sequence. The controls will remain inactive while the sequence is running and should become available again when the sequence has stopped. Now, if we're looking at an analog PTZ camera, we need to make sure the video encoder hosting the video stream and the encoder hosting the serial port are on the same archiver. So in our example here, we shouldn't have the encoder that is used for the serial connection connecting over to a different archiver. We should have that added over to the same archiver that we're using for the video connection. Now for some encoders or IP cameras, we may have to install drivers to use the PTZ controls from the web page. Now this has caused interference in some cases if we set this up from the web interface. So a good tip would be to log into the web page for the unit and remove any PTZ drivers that have been installed. Now the last thing I want to mention for this is to take a look at the known issues in the GTAP and the release notes for the service release you're on. Now it is possible that this is a known issue for the particular service release you're on, and it might be resolved in a newer or more recent service release. You can also take a look at the Resolved Issues section in the current service release to see if anything is mentioned there as well. If this is a known issue, just upgrade to the latest service release whenever that's possible for you. Okay, let's take a minute to look at PTZ patterns, which are sometimes called tours as well. The pattern controls can be found in the widget and allow you to run, record, rename, and clear different patterns. Running a pattern causes the PTZ to move between different preset positions after set time intervals. Now, if you want to stop a pattern, just click on one of the preset buttons or one of the movement controls in the PTZ widget. In some cases, the record button is grayed out, and you may also see that the clear pattern button is grayed out as well. You can see that by clicking on the three dots here. Now the first thing to check is if the pattern recording functionality is available for that particular unit. It's possible that the unit may be able to run patterns, but will not be able to record them from the security desk interface. In that case, just log into the unit's web interface and set up the pattern from there. You should still be able to select the pattern from the drop-down list in the security desk and run it using the widget controls. If this was a function that was working previously or is working on another unit that's the same model, try to remove the unit from Security Center, perform a factory reset on the unit, and add the unit again. For some units, the default unit functionality may not support more than one pattern or the ability to record patterns. Check the web interface to see if there's an option to set more than one pattern as active, and make sure the Patterns feature is present and enabled. Now, when we're dealing with analog PTZ units, we need to add a video encoder or IP video camera that has a serial port to connect the PTZ to. If you see the situation where the unit was added to Security Center, but the serial port does not show up in the Peripherals tab of the video unit, there's a couple of things that you can try. First of all, log into the web interface of the unit and make sure that the COM port is actually enabled. For Access units, there are a couple of other options we have to validate as well. We mentioned previously that the COM port must be set to generic TCP/IP, but we also need to make sure that the listener port is enabled and is set to port 1080. If everything looks okay, remove the unit from Security Center, perform a factory reset on the unit, and add it back in again. There might be a setting buried in the menu somewhere that's causing Security Center not to recognize the serial port, and this is really the fastest way to get it back to the correct settings. We've been taking a look at analog PTZ issues a lot, but a specific one you might see with IP PTZ cameras is where they show up as a fixed camera and not a dome. If this is the first time that you're adding the unit, just try to remove it and re-add it again. It's a quick step and may resolve the issue very quickly. Next, take a look at the camera's hardware tab and make sure the PTZ option is actually switched to the on position, and this should actually be grayed out and enabled by default. If you don't see this, take a look at the firmware recommended for this camera on the service release you're using. You may need to remove the unit, upgrade or downgrade the firmware, and add it in again to have the PTZ motor recognized. Also, make sure the unit is actually supported for the service release that you're on. Genetec and our partners are constantly testing new units, and these are added as part of the service releases. It could be that the unit is actually on the supported device list, but it was added to a more recent service release than the one that you're currently running on your system. Now, you may see this problem on Access units if the COM port is set to pan-tilt-zoom and not the recommended generic TCP/IP. As we mentioned, this is something to configure from the camera's web page. Okay, so you've added the PTZ and everything is active, but let's take a look at what we can do if the controls are lagging or not responsive. Basically, you let go of the controls and the unit keeps moving for a bit or doesn't start moving immediately. What we're probably looking at here is delay between when the command is sent from the workstation and when it is received by the PTZ unit. If you're using an analog keyboard or joystick, there also might be some delay there, so the first thing to test is see if the delayed response is present when using the on-screen controls. Now, there's a couple of ways of testing the latency, the easiest being a ping test between the workstation and the PTZ unit. You can find out the IP address of the unit from the Properties tab of the video unit entity itself in the Config tool. If this is an analog camera, make sure you get the IP address of the unit with the serial port. Now, if you do a ping and you're getting very high ping times, you know there's a problem right there, and you'll have to take a look at the network to see where the bottleneck is. Wireless networks usually add to the response delay, so if the workstation and the PTZ are both on a wireless network, this might compound the problem. Now, if there's a workstation with a wired connection to the network, and that's nearby, you can also just go over and test the PTZ on that machine, and that would really help determine if the workstation's wireless connection is the lag issue there. Now, if the ping time isn't that bad, like we can see here, this is a very good ping time. The next step would be to run a packet sniffer like Wireshark and make sure the commands are getting through to the unit. From the Wireshark trace, you may be able to see if the packets are being dropped at some point and have to be resent. Alright, now let's take a look at an example where we have the PTZ camera in a plan manager map, but it's not showing the correct position. Now there's a couple of things to check here, but the main thing we need to understand is that the unit must be able to provide position feedback in order for this to work. If your PTZ only has a 2-wire connection, you will only be sending commands to the unit and not receive anything back from it. The first thing to check is in Plan Manager itself. So pull up a map where you can see your PTZ object and click on the Edit tab on the top ribbon. Click on the object to bring up the object properties on the left. From the Identity section, make sure that the Supports Position Feedback option is checked here. Now, if this is unchecked in Plan Manager 10.3, you'll generally see the camera with a round field of view, unless it believes it is a fixed camera. The next step is to go to the Config tool and double-click on the camera entity in the video task to bring up the live video pop-up. Security Center will give you an extra box in here with the coordinates if it actually does recognize that it's receiving this information from the unit. Now, if you move the PTZ from the widget or from the tile controls, you should see the values change in the coordinates here. You can also try to send movement commands from the expanded set coordinates section. You'll have to click on the wrench icon here to get the additional controls, but you can actually plug in values here and tell it to move to that absolute position, or you can tell it to move relative to the number of degrees that you put in here. Now, if the values are not changing while moving the PTZ, or it won't respond to the coordinate movement commands that we just mentioned, we need to take a look at the hardware and the network. So the first thing to check is the wiring and make sure the wires coming from the unit are going to the correct positions on the serial port. Second is to take a look at the firmware on the unit and make sure it matches the supported firmware version for the Security Center release that you're on. Now, of course, it's always possible there is a physical problem with the unit as well. If this is an analog PTZ, you can try to connect it to another serial port to see if the coordinates are updated from there. Now, we mentioned the firewall before. We should also take a look at the port that's being used to make sure it's not set to only give one-way communication. So the firewall may be open to communication from the client to the video unit, but it won't be getting the coordinates back from it. Okay, let's take a look at a case where the PTZ has been functional, but it stops working after a while. Now, I know the wiring and the protocol and everything like that is set up correctly, in this case at least, so we don't have to start looking at that. Now, sometimes we may have a case where the archiver loses connection with the PTZ component. Restarting the archiver might help, but the first thing to check is the firmware on the unit. This may have been tested and upgraded on a recent service release, so take a look and see if there may be a slight change in the firmware that's causing the confusion. So we don't impact the other video units on the same archiver, we can also try to remove and re-add the video unit as well and see if that restores control. When we're removing a unit, it's going to ask us if we want to keep the video associated with it, which will be reconnected to the unit when it's added again. So it's actually not that bad a procedure, it's pretty safe. Alright, the next scenario I'd like to touch on is where the PTZ is moving out of control or not reacting to the commands as it should be. The first thing is to try to connect to the unit's web interface and see if it's having the same reaction from there or if this is only happening from within Security Center. So if the web interface is showing the same behavior, there may be a physical problem with the unit or a connection issue to the PTZ motor. We took a look at a few things we can do when the controls are lagging, and those steps would be appropriate for here as well, such as checking the latency of the commands that are sent. Too much of a delay when sending commands may cause odd behavior when they finally do reach the PTZ unit. We can also try to remove the unit, perform a factory reset on it, and add it back to Security Center again. If you're using a CCTV keyboard or joystick, there may be too high or too low a dead zone configured for the joystick. A dead zone is the area around the middle position that is considered to be the center. Too low and it will never think that it was centered and will keep sending commands, and too high may cause it not to recognize when it actually is centered, causing the PTZ to continue the last motion command. We've mentioned taking a look at the protocol and making sure it's set to the correct one with when we're dealing with analog PTZ cameras. But there have been cases where this information is not correct on IP PTZ cameras as well. Now normally right here, Security Center should recognize the unit and add it with the correct protocol. Since we can't manually modify the protocol on an IP PTZ camera, as you can see it's grayed out here, the way to fix this is to remove the unit, perform a factory reset on the unit to bring back the defaults, and once the unit is added again, Security Center should choose the correct protocol after that. Alright, we talked about locking and unlocking the PTZ for use by a user before, but what about when the system sends commands to the PTZ? In cases where we have an automatic function set up to run on the PTZ, such as a go to preset command, the PTZ gets locked by the directory when it's performing the action. Now normally it should release the PTZ for manual use right after it finishes, but you might see a case where the PTZ gets locked by the directory and won't go back to an unlocked state. In that case, take a look at the general settings of the system task under the Actions tab and see if anything is set to run for this PTZ. Try to modify the event to action that's been configured and save the changes. If that doesn't release the PTZ controls, you may have to delete it and recreate the action. If you want to modify, you just need to select it and go to the Edit button on the bottom here. Now this is a rare case, but it is good to know what you can do to get it back to a normal state if this situation ever comes up. In the configuration section, we were talking about the enhanced zoom features, such as the zoom box and click to enter. If you're trying out the enhanced features in the security desk and they aren't working, there are a couple of things that we can check. First of all, this is a new feature that has been added as part of Service Release 7, so the first thing to verify is the version of the directory and workstation software. Take a look at the firmware in use on the unit as well, and make sure it matches the version that has been tested with the service release you're on. Of course, if you find the controls aren't working and you're on the newest service release, go over to the hardware tab for the camera and make sure that the enhanced PTZ control is set to on. You may see as well some cameras require calibration in order to use the enhanced controls properly, so don't forget to hit the calibrate button next to the enhanced PTZ option. This was taken from an Axis camera and it doesn't actually need the calibration. Now, some cameras do not support the enhanced features, so you won't see the option in the hardware tab either. And as I mentioned, others like the Axis cameras don't even require it, and the button just doesn't appear in that case. Okay, one last specific troubleshooting tip I want to look at is when you're having trouble renaming presets. Now, most of the time this is a privilege problem. The preset will locally allow itself to be renamed, but it won't be applied to the system. As soon as the user who did the renaming logs out and back in, the preset will return to the previous name, and other users will never see the change as well. Now, an easy way to test this is to log in as an administrator and make the same change, and see if that name actually sticks. If it does, we want to jump into the config tool and take a look at the privileges for the user who is unable to rename the preset. Take a look at the PTZ motor privileges, and under use presets here, make sure the edit presets child privilege here is set to allowed. So in this case, this is our problem, and we have it set to deny, so we need to switch that over. Now you can find the PTZ motor privileges under action privileges, cameras, view live video, and then you'll get to the section we have here. Okay, our last section of the webinar is going to take a brief look at a few general troubleshooting tips that might be useful if you're having a PTZ issue that we haven't outlined in the previous section, or if the issue persists after trying all the recommended solutions that we presented. Now the first tip would be to restart the archiver role. Now considering this will affect all the other units connected to the archiver, this is something you'd want to do when you have some downtime, and maybe try the other solutions first, definitely. Restarting the archiver will cause it to reach back out to the PTZ unit to reestablish a connection to it. So in case there was some kind of blockage or timeout, this would get the two talking again, the archiver and the PTZ motor. Now this is not a normal situation, so if you're seeing a problem that you have to constantly resolve by restarting the archiver, you may want to get in touch with the support department and get some traces going to see what's happening there. The next tip is to remove the unit from the archiver, perform a factory reset on it to restore the defaults to the unit, and add it back to the security center. Now we've seen this in a few of the specific troubleshooting steps, and it's really not a bad thing to try in general. Now you're not going to lose any video recordings when removing the unit if you choose to keep it, and the archive video should be associated with the same unit when it comes back up. Just as long as you do say that you want to keep the video when it prompts you for it there. Now this is a particularly good step as well when you're moving a unit to a security center that was previously on another system or on another VMS even. Now another thing to consider is that the problem you're seeing, it might actually be caused by a combination of things. This is definitely harder to troubleshoot, which is why it's important to double check the settings whenever faced with a PTZ that's not working properly. So for example, the PTZ may not be responding because the address is not set correctly and the serial port has not been configured with the correct baud rate. So if you go in and the address has been verified with the dip switch settings on the unit and you've changed it to the correct one, but the unit is still not moving, continue on and check the other settings, and you'll eventually hit the serial port and you'll be able to configure the right baud rate, and that should be able to resolve the issue for you there. Now don't forget that some changes will require you to remove the PTZ from the tile and add it in again to see if the change has taken effect, or log out and back on if this is a privilege problem and any privileges were modified for a user. Now of course in the end these are physical units and we may be looking at a hardware issue as well. It's a nice luxury if you have a spare unit to try on the same archiver, and if you do, then just try it out and try using the same wiring configuration. And that can give us a good idea if the problem is on the unit itself, or if it's one of the configuration settings, the firmware, or a known issue with the service release you're on. Alright, so that covers the last section of the webinar for today, and that pretty much wraps things up. In the next couple of days we're going to post the video of today's webinar on the GTAP, as well as the general questions and answers in the GTAP forums. In the forum section for today's webinar, we'll also have a link to the slides in PDF format for your reference. Now in case you have any other questions for us, we're going to keep the session active for about another 10 minutes or so. If you think of anything you'd like to ask after the webinar has finished, please feel free to post it in the GTAP forums and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. When you close the webinar or when we end the session on our side, you're going to be presented with a very short survey that just gives us a little feedback on the webinar you attended today. If you have a couple of minutes to spare, we'd really appreciate any comments or suggestions you have, and you can just jot them down in that survey. On behalf of myself and everyone at the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, I'd like to thank you very much for attending the webinar today, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.